When I first inherited my grandfather's farmhouse, I had no idea that the well on his property would soon become the focal point of a bitter, escalating battle. I never expected to find myself pitted against Victoria Sterling, the self-proclaimed Queen of Willow Creek Estates. She was the newly appointed vice president of the HOA, and I quickly learned that she wasn't going to let a little thing like history or legal rights stand in her way. The day I received the inheritance documents, I could barely contain my excitement. Grandpa Joe's farmhouse was now mine. I could still picture him showing me how to draw water from the old stone well when I was just a boy. That well wasn't just a source of water. It was a part of our family's legacy, a tangible connection to the past. As I stood there with the lawyer, holding that yellowed envelope, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Grandpa had made sure that his property would always be protected, especially from people like Victoria. The farmhouse needed work, of course. The roof needed fixing, and the garden had to be cleaned up. But the land, the 5 acres of rolling hills and the century-old well, was as beautiful as ever. It stood proudly in the side yard, a stone monument to the history of the place. I spent the first weekend fixing up the yard, clearing away weeds, and repairing the wooden roof that sheltered the well. It was then that my new neighbors, the Coopers, stopped by with a basket of muffins. "We're so glad someone's living here again," Mason Cooper said, smiling warmly. "Your grandfather was a wonderful man." I nodded, grateful for the kind words. "Thanks, I'm glad to be here," I replied. "Can I offer you some water from the well?" As we stood there, talking, Mason glanced nervously at the street. "Just so you know," he said quietly, "the HOA's gotten stricter recently. There's a new board member who's passionate about the rules." I chuckled, brushing it off. "The HOA doesn't apply to this property," I explained. "Grandpa made sure of that when they first set it up. I've got the documents to prove it." The relief on their faces should have been a red flag, but at the time, I was too focused on the possibilities of my new life. I didn't realize that trouble was already brewing just beyond my fence. 3 days later, as I was watering my vegetable garden, I noticed a shadow looming over me. I turned around and saw Victoria Sterling standing at the edge of my property. Her blonde hair pulled tightly into a ponytail and oversized, sunglasses perched on her nose. She looked like she was prepared for battle. "You must be Joe's grandchild," she said, her tone cold and businesslike. "I'm Victoria Sterling, HOA Board Vice President, and I'm here to inform you that your well is an eyesore." Her words hit me like a slap to the face. An eyesore? It was a family treasure. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "Actually, this property was established long before the HOA," I said, trying to remain calm. "It's exempt from your rules." Victoria's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed. "No property is exempt from maintaining community standards," she snapped. "I've already documented several violations." She pulled out her phone, taking several pictures of my yard. My stomach twisted. Something told me this wasn't going to be the end of it. Days passed in a blur after Victoria Sterling's initial visit, and each one seemed to add fuel to the fire she had started. I tried to focus on my work, the projects I had inherited along with the farmhouse, but the tension in the air was thick. I knew this wasn't going to end quietly. Victoria's icy demeanor and obsession with my grandfather's, well, couldn't just be brushed off. The next morning, I was in the garden, inspecting the rows of vegetables that were slowly but surely starting to take root. But as I bent over to check the soil, I felt the weight of someone's presence looming nearby. I looked up to see her again, Victoria, standing just beyond my fence, arms crossed, her face a mask of thinly veiled disgust. This time, she wasn't alone. 2 men, taller than the average person and wearing stiff suits, stood at her side. Victoria's gaze locked onto mine, a challenge in her eyes. I could already feel my pulse quickening. "Mr. Rivers," she said, her voice as cold as a winter morning, "you've clearly ignored the HOA's standards, and we've discussed this matter far too many times. I'm here to inform you that I've arranged for a full inspection." I stood up straight, wiping the dirt from my hands. "I've told you before." "Victoria," I said, keeping my voice even. This property is exempt from your rules. It was part of the original agreement. She didn't even flinch. That agreement is irrelevant now. The HOA is empowered to ensure safety and uniformity. And your well, it's a hazard. Hazard? I repeated, bewildered. This well has been here for over a century. It's been part of the community longer than your HOA ever existed. Victoria's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The board has decided otherwise. We have the power to force compliance. You can't just have an unsightly water feature taking up space. I could feel the anger building inside me. This wasn't about the well. It was about power. Her power. She wanted control, and if she could bend me to her will, she'd do it. And if I refuse? I asked, standing my ground. Victoria stepped closer, her smile now a tight, predatory thing. Then we'll move forward with more serious actions. Trust me, I'll make sure this well gets removed, one way or another. My stomach twisted, but I held her gaze. You've made a serious mistake, Victoria. I'm not backing down. With that, she nodded to the two men beside her. They started taking pictures of the well and the surrounding area. My mind raced, 1,000 scenarios playing out in my head. This was escalating fast, and I wasn't prepared to just sit back and let her tear apart everything my grandfather had worked for. As the men finished their documentation and turned to leave, I stayed rooted to the spot, watching Victoria closely. Her parting words only deepened the unease growing in my chest. "You'll regret this, Mr. Rivers," she said before turning on her heel, leaving me alone with the growing dread that I was about to face the fight of my life. The days dragged on, and the tension in the air only thickened. Victoria Sterling wasn't about to back down. Each morning as I stepped outside, I half expected her to be standing at my fence, ready to accuse me of some new infraction. I knew she was relentless, but nothing could prepare me for the next step in her campaign to control my property. It started innocently enough. A few more violation notices arrived in the mail. Each, one more ridiculous than the last. A crack in the sidewalk, an unapproved garden feature, and of course, the well that Victoria insisted was an eyesore. I kept the letters in a drawer, compiling them for evidence, while trying to focus on the work that needed to be done around the house. But one morning, as I sat in the living room with a cup of coffee, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Mason Cooper, my neighbor, standing there with a grim expression. "You need to see this," he said, leading me outside. I followed him to the front yard, and my heart sank when I saw the new addition to the scene. Victoria had arrived with 2 workers and a clipboard, and they were now taking measurements of the well. "They're planning to shut it down," Mason said quietly. I overheard her talking to a few people. "She's pushing for it to be removed." I felt my blood run cold. "She can't just do that," I muttered. "I have the original documents. This well is protected." Mason nodded, his brow furrowed. "She doesn't care. If she can't get you to comply, she'll try to go through the HOA and force your hand. You're going to need more than documents to stop her." It was clear now. This wasn't just about the well. It was a vendetta, something personal. Victoria wasn't only trying to tear down the structure, she was trying to strip away my family's history, piece by piece. I had to act. Later that day, I called Lydia Brooks, my attorney, and explained the situation. She listened carefully before advising, "Get everything documented. Every call, every conversation. And don't let them get away with this. If they're threatening you, we'll take them to court." I immediately began gathering the necessary documents, checking with the State Historical Society, and making sure everything was in place. I also increased the security around the property. Hidden cameras were installed, recording every movement near the well. The quiet surveillance felt like the calm before the storm, but I knew it was only a matter of time before Victoria would escalate things. The next day, while I was reviewing the security footage, a new letter arrived. This time, it wasn't just a violation notice. It was a final warning. Victoria had pushed for an emergency meeting, and she was demanding that I comply with her demands or face legal action. The fight was no longer just between neighbors. It was war, and the stakes were higher than ever. I clenched my fists, a mix of anger and fear rising inside me. Victoria had crossed a line, and now I had to make sure she didn't get away with it. As the weeks passed, it became clear that Victoria Sterling wouldn't stop. She wasn't just pushing for compliance with the HOA's rules. She was actively trying to erase my grandfather's legacy. The more I resisted, the more aggressive she became, and I knew I had to be ready for whatever came next. Then, one evening, as the sun began to set, a knock at my door caught me off guard. I opened it to find Mason Cooper, looking more serious than I had ever seen him. "You need to see this," he said, his voice low. He didn't wait for an invitation, leading me to the side of my house. My stomach tightened with unease. There, across the yard, stood Victoria, flanked by two workers, a clipboard in her hand. They were measuring the well again, writing down notes with cold, calculated precision. I watched them, trying to keep my emotions in check. My fists clenched at my sides. I overheard her talking to the workers. Mason said, his voice barely above a whisper, "She's planning on having it demolished, claiming it's a safety hazard." My mind raced. She can't just destroy it. This well is part of my family's history, and it's protected. Mason's eyes darkened. She doesn't care about that. She has the HOA's full backing. She's pushing them to act. You need to do something before it's too late. The weight of his words settled in my chest like a stone. I had tried to be patient, tried to work things out peacefully. But it was clear now that this wasn't about the well or the property anymore. It was personal. Victoria wasn't just using the HOA to bend me to her will. She was trying to tear down everything that my grandfather had built, everything that mattered to me. I couldn't let her get away with it. Not now. Not after everything my family had invested in this land. The next morning, I reached out to Lydia Brooks, my attorney, and filled her in on the latest developments. She was silent for a moment before she spoke. "It's time to take action. Gather all the documents, every letter, every piece of communication. We'll build a case against her." I spent the rest of the day gathering evidence, making sure everything was documented. My security cameras were already recording every movement near the well, and now I was prepared to fight back with the full weight of the law. The well, a piece of history, wasn't just mine to protect. It belonged to the entire community. As the days went by, more violation notices arrived. Victoria was relentless, but so was I. The HOA continued to back her, but I wasn't backing down. I knew I had the truth on my side, and soon Victoria would realize that her reign of terror was coming to an end. Then, one afternoon, as I stood on my porch watching the world go by, I saw her. Victoria was standing at the edge of my yard, a smug smile on her face. She wasn't just standing there, she was waiting for me. "I'm coming for your well, Ethan," she called out, her voice dripping with menace. "And this time, there's nothing you can do to stop me." Her words hung in the air, heavy and threatening. But deep down, I knew one thing for sure. This fight was far from over. The more I resisted Victoria Sterling, the more she pushed back. It became clear that this wasn't just a battle over property. It was a war, one that she was determined to win, no matter the cost. The HOA had been her weapon for years, and now she had her sights set on destroying my grandfather's legacy. The well, a symbol of my family's history, had become the target of her relentless campaign. By the time the next violation notice arrived, I knew the stakes had gotten higher. The first few had been manageable, but now it felt different. Victoria wasn't just attacking the well. She was trying to tear apart everything my grandfather had built. Each letter, each fine felt like a personal attack. I was being pushed to the brink. It wasn't long before I received another, certified letter, this one marked urgent. My heart sank as I tore it open. The HOA was threatening legal action if I didn't comply with their demands. The letter stated that the well was a safety hazard and needed to be removed immediately. There was no mention of the historical significance, no recognition of the fact that the well had been providing water to the land for over a century. To Victoria, it was just another obstacle to bulldoze. I sat down at the kitchen table, the weight of the letter pressing down on me. It was clear now, she wasn't going to stop until the well was gone. The thought of losing it, of losing that part of my family's history was unbearable. But I couldn't just give up. I had to fight back. I called Lydia Brooks, my attorney, and filled her in on the latest development. After hearing about the HOA's threats, she was quick to respond. This isn't just a matter of a well anymore, Ethan. This is about preserving your grandfather's legacy. We'll fight this in court if we have to. With Lydia's help, I began to gather all the documents, every violation notice, and every communication I had received from Victoria and the HOA. I even took photographs of the well, the surrounding property, and the increasingly hostile actions of the HOA. It was time to take this battle to the next level. Days passed, and the situation grew more tense. One afternoon, as I was reviewing the evidence with Lydia, I saw Victoria standing at the edge of my property again, clipboard in hand, surveying the land like she was making her final move. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something in them, an undeniable determination. "I'm not giving up," she called out, her voice cold. "You will comply, or I'll make sure the HOA takes it from you." I felt the fury bubbling up inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had the law on my side, and this time I wasn't going to let her win. The legal battle was now set in motion, and I knew the fight for my grandfather's well had only just begun. But one thing was certain. Victoria had underestimated my resolve. The tension between me and Victoria Sterling had escalated quickly. Every day felt like a battle. And it wasn't just about the well anymore. It was about everything I had inherited from my grandfather. The more I resisted, the harder she pushed. But something inside me told me I had to hold my ground. She wouldn't stop until she had destroyed everything my grandfather had worked for, and that included his legacy. It all came to a head one chilly morning when I arrived home from running errands. The moment I turned into my driveway, I knew something was off. There was a dark, ominous cloud hanging over my property. My heart raced as I pulled up to the house and saw a truck parked near the well, a crew of workers unloading supplies. I immediately knew what they were here to do. I rushed out of the car, my pulse pounding in my ears. "What are you doing?" I called, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. Victoria stepped forward from the shadows, wearing a smug smile, the same cold expression I had seen countless times before. "We're removing the well, Ethan," she said, her tone calm, almost too calm. "The HOA has authorized this. It's a safety hazard, and frankly, it's an eyesore." I felt my chest tighten. I couldn't breathe. "You can't just take it," I said, stepping closer, trying to keep my voice steady. "This well is part of my family's history. It's protected. You know that." Victoria's smile didn't falter. "I'm afraid that's not true anymore. We've had an emergency meeting, and we're going through with this. You had plenty of chances to comply, but you've ignored every notice, every warning." I took a step back, my mind racing. This wasn't just about rules, it was personal. Victoria had crossed a line. The well was more than a water source. It was the heart of my grandfather's legacy. And now she was trying to take that from me. I turned to the workers, but before I could say anything else, one of them started to pull out a large machine. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice hoarse with desperation. "You can't do this." Victoria, with her arms crossed, watched me calmly. "I'm doing you a favor," she said, almost mockingly. "It's for the safety of the entire community. You'll thank me later." But I wasn't backing down. I couldn't. This wasn't just about me. It was about everything my grandfather had stood for, everything he had protected for decades. I pulled my phone from my pocket, quickly dialing Lydia, my attorney. As I explained the situation, I felt the weight of what was happening. Victoria had just pushed me to the edge, and now it was time to fight back. "I'll be there in an hour," Lydia said, her voice determined. "We'll stop this. You've got the law on your side." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. The fight wasn't over, but it was about to get much bigger. The days that followed were filled with growing unease. Victoria Sterling was relentless, and each new violation notice pushed me closer to the edge. It wasn't just about the well anymore. It was about my family's legacy. Every move I made seemed to fuel her obsession with taking control of the property that had been in my family for generations. One afternoon, after spending hours in the attic sorting through old papers, I decided to take a walk around the property. The sun was low, casting a golden hue over the land. I needed a moment to breathe and clear my head. But as I walked towards the well, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of my yard. Victoria. Her posture was rigid, her arms crossed, and there was no mistaking the look of determination on her face. I stopped in my tracks, the feeling of dread creeping up my spine. "What are you doing here, Victoria?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fury bubbling inside me. Victoria didn't move. Instead, she simply stared at me, her lips curling into a thin, condescending smile. "I'm here to make sure you understand something." "Ethan," she said, her voice cold and unyielding, "you can't keep this well. The HOA has spoken. It's unsafe, unsightly, and frankly, a violation of community standards." My stomach twisted in disbelief. "You can't just tear it down," I said, my hands clenching at my sides. "It's protected. This well is part of my grandfather's legacy. You have no right to take it from me." Victoria's smile never wavered. "The HOA has the right to ensure the safety and well-being of the entire community. And if that means removing your little water feature, so be it." I took a step forward, trying to maintain control of my emotions. "You're not going to win this, Victoria. I have the law on my side. The Historical Society recognizes this well. You can't just erase history because it doesn't fit into your perfect little vision of the neighborhood." For the first time, her expression flickered, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same cold mask of superiority. "You're wasting your time," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You'll see." And with that, she turned and walked away, the sound of her expensive heels clicking against the gravel. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. Every word she spoke felt like a threat. But it was clear now. This wasn't just about the well. This was a fight for control, for power, and for my family's history. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. More letters arrived, more threats. And still, Victoria's presence loomed large. But I wasn't backing down. I couldn't. There was too much at stake now. The next move was mine. Late that night, after hours of scouring the old documents my grandfather had left behind, I found what I needed: proof that the well was not just a part of my family's past, but a legal right that Victoria couldn't touch. I smiled to myself, knowing that the next time we crossed paths, she wouldn't be the one holding the power. The pressure was mounting. I had prepared myself for what was coming, but nothing could have prepared me for how far Victoria Sterling would go. After weeks of her threats and constant harassment from the HOA, I was finally feeling the weight of her determination pressing against me. Every attempt to stop her only fueled her desire to retaliate, and now she had resorted to a dangerous new tactic. It was a stormy night when the phone call came. My heart skipped a beat as I heard Lydia's voice on the other end, urgent and strained. "Ethan, you need to get down here now. There's something you need to see." I barely had time to process her words before I grabbed my coat and headed out the door. The wind was howling as I made my way to the property, the rain coming down in sheets. My mind raced with fear and anticipation. What had Victoria done now? When I arrived, I saw the flashing lights of a police car illuminating the front yard. Lydia was waiting for me, standing near the well, her face pale and worried. "They did it," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. "They filled it in, completely." My stomach dropped. I rushed to the well, my heart pounding in my chest. The stone structure that had been a part of my family's history for over a century was now buried beneath a thick layer of concrete. The roof that my grandfather had carefully maintained for years was now splintered and destroyed. I stood there for a moment, unable to process what I was seeing. How could Victoria have done this? The well wasn't just a water source. It was a symbol of everything my family had fought for, and now it was gone. "Did you see who did this?" I asked, turning to Lydia. She shook her head. "I've been watching the security footage, Ethan. It was Victoria. She directed the crew. They came in while you were away on that trip. She didn't just fill it in, she knew exactly what she was doing." I felt my blood boil with rage. "She's gone too far," I muttered under my breath. "This is more than just a fight over the well now. She's trying to erase everything my grandfather stood for." I could feel the weight of the moment settling on me. This wasn't just a battle over property. It was a war over history, over family, and over everything I held dear. But now I had something Victoria didn't. I had proof, and I had the law on my side. With the camera footage in hand, Lydia and I went straight to the police. The officers were shocked at the blatant destruction of a protected historical site. They promised to take action, but I knew I had to do more. I couldn't let Victoria's actions go unpunished. I wasn't backing down anymore. The fight was just beginning, and I had everything I needed to make sure Victoria would pay for her actions. The courtroom was filled with a tense stillness. The stakes had never been higher. Victoria Sterling, with her meticulously pressed suit and calculating smile, sat at the other side of the room, her eyes fixed on me. It was clear she didn't expect this battle to go the way it had. She thought her position on the HOA board gave her the upper hand. But she couldn't have been more wrong. I stood there, feeling the weight of the evidence I had gathered over the past months. The documentation, the video footage, and the testimony, it was all about to come together. This wasn't just a fight for a well anymore. It was a battle for justice, for my family's legacy, and for the truth. Victoria stood to present her side first. Her voice was calm, controlled, almost robotic as she spoke about safety concerns, property values, and how the well was an eyesore. She painted herself as the protector of the community, the champion of progress, but I could see the cracks in her facade. Her words felt hollow, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't focus on attacking her. Instead, I calmly laid out the truth. I presented the historical documents my grandfather had carefully preserved, the exemption agreement that had protected this land and the well for decades. I showed the photos of the well, the video footage of the illegal actions she had taken, and the official records that made it clear she had no right to do what she did. The room was silent as the documents were passed around. I could feel the eyes of the other board members on me. Victoria's smug smile faltered as the truth began to sink in. The look of confidence she had carried with her was now replaced with visible unease. Then came the bombshell. Thomas Reed, the former president of the HOA, took the stand. He had been one of the few to remain neutral, and when he confirmed that the documents Victoria had shown the board were altered, the room erupted in murmurs. The proof was undeniable. Victoria had forged paperwork, missiled the board, and, worst of all, destroyed a protected historical site. Victoria's lawyer tried to salvage the situation, but it was too late. The evidence had already spoken. The judge, an experienced and unflappable woman, turned to Victoria with a stern expression. "Miss Sterling," she began, "your actions have crossed the line. The damage to a protected landmark, the falsification of documents, and the harassment of a neighbor. All of this will have consequences." Victoria's face drained of color. For the first time, she was backed into a corner, and there was nowhere to run. The judge ruled in my favor. The well was to be restored at Victoria's expense, and she was to pay for the damages. The HOA would be dissolved, and the board members, who had supported her actions, would face their own consequences. The fight was finally over. As I stood there, the tension slowly melting away, I felt a deep sense of relief. The well had been saved, but more importantly, the truth had come out. My grandfather's legacy was protected, and Victoria Sterling's reign of control had been shattered. The morning after the court ruling felt like a turning point in the saga. For weeks, I had been battling Victoria Sterling, the HOA, and their relentless efforts to erase my family's history. Now, as the judge's decision echoed in my mind, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of relief and unease. Victoria's defeat didn't bring an end to the conflict. It only felt like the beginning of something more dangerous. The restoration of my grandfather's well was set in motion. The concrete that had once buried it was slowly chipped away, revealing the stone structure that had been a symbol of my family's history for generations. As the workers continued their task, I stood nearby, watching, but my thoughts were consumed with the unknown. Victoria wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she would make one last, desperate move. A few days later, the inevitable happened. The phone rang just as I was finishing breakfast. Lydia's voice was tense on the other end. "Ethan, you need to come down here. Something's happened." I was on my feet instantly, my heart racing. I didn't ask for details. I just grabbed my jacket and headed straight for the property. My mind ran wild with possibilities. What could Victoria have done this time? When I arrived, I was greeted by an unusual sight. The workers were standing around the well, looking confused. Lydia was there too, her expression tight with worry. "What happened?" I asked, my voice low and strained. "There's been some damage," Lydia explained. "The stone's been cracked, and there's something odd with the surrounding area. We think someone might have been here last night." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Victoria. It had to be her. She wouldn't let go of the fight so easily. My thoughts turned dark as I stepped closer to the well. Sure enough, I noticed it. There were fresh marks around the stone, as if someone had deliberately tampered with it. It wasn't just vandalism. It was an attempt to finish what she'd started. I turned to Lydia, my jaw tight with anger. "We need to find out who did this, and we need to do it fast." We called the police and reviewed the security footage from the cameras I had installed. It didn't take long to confirm. My suspicions, Victoria's figure, appeared on the screen, creeping around the well under the cover of night. The footage was shaky, but the intent was clear. She was trying to damage the well beyond repair. "This is getting out of hand," Lydia muttered, watching the video play back. "She's not just fighting for the HOA anymore. This is personal." I felt my resolve harden. Victoria had underestimated me, and now she was about to pay the price. With the police involved and the evidence in hand, there was no way she could escape the consequences of her actions. This wasn't just a battle over a well. It was a fight for my family's legacy, and I would do whatever it took to protect it. The day had finally arrived. After weeks of tension, legal battles, and relentless threats from Victoria Sterling, the final showdown was upon me. The well, my grandfather's legacy, was no longer just a symbol of our family's history. It had become the battleground for everything I held dear. And now, with the police involved, there was no turning back. I stood outside, watching the restoration crew as they worked diligently to undo the damage Victoria had caused. The concrete that had once buried the well was being chipped away, revealing the stonework beneath, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't help but feel the weight of what was still to come. Victoria wasn't going to back down so easily. "Ethan," Lydia called, pulling me from my thoughts. Her voice was shaky, and when I turned to her, I saw the concern etched on her face. "Something's wrong. There's a note." I walked over to her, my pulse quickening as I saw the small piece of paper in her hand. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Victoria's. The note read, "You haven't seen the last of this. The truth about your grandfather will come out soon enough." I felt my stomach twist into knots. What was she talking about? Was there something more to this fight than just a well? As I read the words again, a sinking feeling settled over me. Victoria wasn't just trying to take the well, she was targeting my entire family's reputation. The battle was never really about the well. It was about everything my grandfather had built, everything he had stood for. "Do you think she's lying?" Lydia asked, clearly unsettled by the implications of the note. "Is there something we don't know?" "I don't know," I said, my voice strained. "But I have a feeling Victoria's been hiding something for a long time. If she's trying to ruin my grandfather's name, she's got a bigger agenda than I realized." That night, I couldn't sleep. The note replayed in my mind, over and over, like a broken record. What did Victoria mean by the truth? Was there something in my grandfather's past that could jeopardize everything I was fighting for? I didn't know what to believe anymore. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let her destroy my family's legacy. I spent the next few days digging through my grandfather's old records. Letters, business deals, land documents, anything that could shed light on Victoria's cryptic threat. As I flipped through the papers, one in particular caught my eye. A series of letters from Victoria's father, dated back to the 1970s. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. There was more to this than I had ever known. Victoria wasn't just trying to tear down my family's legacy. She was protecting her own. The final hearing was upon me, and my heart raced as I stood at the courthouse steps. Everything I had worked for, everything my grandfather had fought to protect, was on the line. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Victoria Sterling, with her cold smile and sharp gaze, was sitting across the room, her lawyer by her side. I knew this battle was far from over, but I wasn't about to back down. The courtroom was packed with neighbors, all watching as the tension reached its peak. The air was thick with anticipation. Victoria had come prepared, of course, but I had the upper hand now. The documents, the evidence, the video footage, all of it was on my side. She had underestimated me, and I was about to make her regret it. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I laid out the facts, one by one. The historical documentation of the well, the forged signatures, and the illegal actions Victoria had taken to destroy, something that had been in my family for generations. I saw her squirm as the evidence was presented. The smugness she had once carried so confidently was gone now, replaced by something darker: fear. "Ms. Sterling," the judge said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife, "it's clear that your actions have caused irreversible damage to this historical site. You will be held accountable for your actions, and restitution will be made to the plaintiff." The gavel slammed down, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders as the judge's words sank in. It was over. Victoria had lost. But just as I began to relax, something unexpected happened. As I turned to leave the courtroom, Victoria's voice sliced through the air. "You think you've won?" She spat, her eyes blazing with fury. "This isn't over. You don't know what's coming next." Her words hung in the air like a dark cloud. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I didn't let it show. She had underestimated me once before, and she wouldn't make the same mistake again. But even as I walked out of the courtroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Over the next few days, things seemed quiet. Too quiet. But then, as I sat in my kitchen one evening, a knock came at the door. I opened it to find Lydia standing there, her face pale, holding a letter in her hands. "It's from Victoria," she said, her voice trembling. "She's filing an appeal." I took the letter from her, the words on the page sending a jolt of adrenaline through my body. Victoria wasn't giving up, but neither was I. The fight wasn't over, but I knew one thing for certain. This time I was ready.